Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
And go around and say our names. I'm Bob. Mike.
Sean.
George. Howard. Robert. Myself. Mark. Stuart. Joel. Jim.
Steve. Clint. Bob. Lee. Peter.
Jack.
Paul. Gary. Liz. David.
Richard.
Snake.
Anybody come and say their names?
Kevin.
Today's speaker is Sean Hargens, who's spoken here before, so he's going to introduce himself.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think this is the fourth time that I've spoken over the last 2 years. So more and more faces and names are becoming familiar, and it's great to see you all again. I'll just say a few things about myself for those who I haven't met at the previous talks. My name's Sean Hargens, and I am originally from Oregon and Washington. I've lived in the Bay Area for the last 4 years as a doctoral student at the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is just down the street, about 10 blocks. And I came into contact with GBF through Clint Steiner, who's a close friend, and who I met through the Ken Wilber study group, which often meets at CIIS. I am doing my doctoral dissertation on integral ecology, which is looking at the various approaches to the environment and kind of understanding them through the work of Ken Wilber's integral model. And I've been working closely with Ken on a number of projects over the last few years. And I'm a practicing Tibetan Buddhist and also a member of the Diamond Approach with A.H. Almaas. Well, I'm excited today because I get to talk about something that's very passionate for me, and that's integral ecology. I think the first time I spoke, I talked about intersubjectivity, which is also an area I've explored a lot theoretically and experientially. And then I spoke about Bhutan, where I went and kind of studied integral ecology as it occurs in the Bhutanese culture. And then the last talk I gave was on Ken Wilber's model and his book, The Marriage of Sense and Soul. And because that was such a rich discussion, and given the nature of Wilber's work, there were a lot of things left unsaid, and there seemed to be enough interest among the people here last time that Clint and I thought it might be worthwhile to explore Wilber some more. And a number of people are familiar with Ken in the room, I understand, and then a lot of you aren't. So I was faced with the difficult task of trying to think about the best avenue into Wilber's model that would both satisfy people who were familiar with Ken's work as well as serve as an introduction for people who aren't as familiar with his work. And I think I came up with a good solution, but we'll see. I'm hoping to only talk for about a half hour or so, and what I want to do is explore Wilber's model and explain it by using an example of ecology. And I think this will be nice for those who are familiar with Ken's work to see it applied in a particular area. And for those who aren't familiar with his work, hopefully it'll serve as a way of getting a sense of what his approach is all about. So I will start with kind of this catchphrase that Wilber often uses to describe what integral means. He says that it includes all quadrants, all levels, all states, all lines, all types. To unpack that just a little bit, when he says all quadrants, he's referring to the fact, in his opinion, that each moment contains 4 dimensions. For example, as I sit here right now and speak to you, I have an interior experience of what's going on. There's also the exterior dimension of my body and of the sound of my voice and what I see out there. In addition to the interior and exterior of my individual self, there's the interior and exterior of us. So the interior would be the meaning that my words have between us, if you're understanding me or not, and maybe shared somatic realities that are penetrating between us in subtle energy ways. And so that would be examples of the interior of us. And then the exteriors of us would just be the fact that we're in this building, we're in San Francisco, we're wearing clothes, we all have certain heights and certain weights and share certain body structures that are similar. So Wilber suggests that each and every moment always contains these 4 dimensions which are irreducible to each other and can't be understood on the terms of any of the others. They have to be honored on their own terms. In terms of levels, so that's all quadrants, moving on to all levels, Ken suggests that within each one of those domains there are levels of complexity or waves of complexity. And he draws them sciences and psychology and biology and so forth and cultural studies to explore the kinds of complexity that occur within each one of those domains. So setting levels aside and moving to states, all states refers in its most elemental sense to the fact that we experience waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states every day as we go to bed and wake up in the morning, or if we take naps. And that these 3 essential states kind of serve as a backbone for a variety of other states, transpersonal states, meditative experiences, and so forth. So you could understand waking, dreaming, and deep sleep as also being gross realms of consciousness, subtle realms of consciousness, and causal realms of consciousness. So using this framework, Wilber is able to explore and talk about the multiplicity of various states that we might experience within our bodies, within our minds, between people, and so forth. All lines refers to the fact that if you take individual development, for example, there are, in his opinion, based on a variety of research projects, at least a dozen different developmental lines within each of the 4 domains. So examples of some developmental lines within the individual interior would be cognitive development, emotional development, aesthetic development, maybe kinesthetic capacities and development, spiritual development, gender identity dynamics, and so forth and so on. And the last, all types, refers to, for example, Jungian types, the various archetypes, the Myers-Briggs indicator system, the Enneagram system with its 9 personality types, astrological signs, and so forth. So what Ken's wanting to highlight by pointing out that integral includes quadrants, levels, lines, types, and states is that if you're going to have a comprehensive understanding of any given situation, you need to take into account as many of those aspects as possible. And to the extent that you're leaving out any of that, then you're not acknowledging a part of reality. Ken often reduces that long phrase to just talking about quadrants and levels. And so you'll often see in his writings him refer to integral as being all quadrant, all level. And this has the acronym AQAL, which is pronounced AQUAL. So that kind of gives you an overarching sense of Wilber's integral vision. He's written over 7,000 pages. I counted them up last week as I was writing a document. So there's a lot that can be said about each and every one of those things I just mentioned. So it's much beyond the scope of this talk to try and go into detail at any single point. So I'm just going to be painting some kind of broad brushstrokes, and then during discussion we could come to any one of those pieces and maybe explore it some more. So let me explore and expose and talk about how I envision integral ecology. And I'm going to just talk about what I am naming the 4 ecologies, which are related to the 4 quadrants, and then the 8 ecological value systems, which I relate to the level or levels of complexity. So to begin with the quadrants, one way to understand the quadrants is interior, individual interior can be referred to as experience. Individual exterior, I will refer to as behavior. Kind of collective interior, I will refer to as culture. And collective exterior, I will refer to as system. So I'm suggesting that there are 4 ecologies. There is a experience ecology, there is a culture ecology, behavior ecology, and systems ecology. Now, ecology as a technical science is largely just concerned with systems ecology and to some extent behavior ecology. And it doesn't include experience ecology or culture ecology, though a lot of, as we'll see, environmental approaches try and bring in those additional pieces. So I'm wanting to highlight in the work that I'm doing that given that there are these 4 ecologies and none of them can be understood on the terms of any of the others, then we need to develop a deeper understanding of each of these ecologies and how they relate to the natural world. So let me just run through a few examples of the various ecologies so you can get a deeper sense. So I'll just start with the typical systems ecology. And maybe I'll use the example of an oak tree as a way of trying to bring some continuity to the 4 ecologies. So to understand an oak tree from systems ecology, you would look at its relationship to the watershed. You would look at its nutritional dynamics in terms of its root system and how it's interacting with microorganisms. You would look at its various growth cycles and maybe immunity systems. You would look at how it interacts with drought cycles and maybe water table dynamics and so forth. So kind of understanding the oak tree from a very systemic exterior perspective in terms of things that can be measured through scientific methodologies. To understand the oak tree from the behavioral perspective or behavior ecology, you wouldn't focus so much on the systemic dimensions as you would the individual exterior aspects. For example, you would look at maybe the thickness of the bark or the length of the leaves or the size of the cones. You would look at maybe the composition of the cellular structure within the leaves. You would look at how it reproduces. Are its behaviors? Does it reproduce after fires? Does it reproduce a month into spring or only after a heavy rain? So kind of understanding and maybe also looking at the other animals that use the oak tree as its home or as a source of food or shelter or something like this. So here you're focusing mostly on just kind of typical biology and maybe chemistry and some of the physical sciences and using their methodologies. To understand the oak tree from the cultural perspective, you want to not only understand it from the human cultural perspective, but integral ecology wants to emphasize that the oak tree itself has a culture, and we need to try and understand and honor that as well, and not just know and explore how it has meaning in our culture per se. For example, you would be open to the reality that an oak tree has an interiority, that it has some basic level of sentience. Whether that sentience comprises emotions or thoughts isn't so much the concern. Some people would suggest yes, many people would suggest no. But what integral ecology wants to at least point out is that given that it's a living being and that it has exteriors, it must also have interiors. And so if you have a grove of oak trees, an integral ecologist wants to be sensitive to the fact that there are probably some subtle dynamics between the oak trees in terms of their interiors interacting with each other. It gets tricky in here in this area because a lot of alarms go off for people that you're applying a level of consciousness to the oak tree that is above and beyond what's provable. While those are important concerns, and you have to be very specific about what you're saying, the integral ecologist still wants to argue and say that there is some level of sentience. And we can debate and explore and research as to what that level of sentience is, but we start with the idea and the understanding that it's there, and that level of sentience is interacting with other types of sentience, other oak trees, birds, fungi, and so forth. So that there's this complex culture within that grove of beings and their interiors and their interactions. And oak trees will experience other oak trees in a way that's different than how people will experience other oak trees. So another aspect of cultural ecology from this perspective is that the oak tree might have certain meanings within our systems of communication and rituals and so forth. And so we want to honor and include that the oak tree might symbolize strength or wisdom, might symbolize power or longevity, and you can include the many indigenous approaches and understandings of sacred trees and so forth. So all of that would be included in the cultural ecology. In the experience ecology, it's similar in some ways to the cultural ecology in that you would not only look at how you're experiencing the oak tree subjectively in terms of maybe it brings up sadness or vitality, or maybe it reminds you of a memory of a picnic that you had with your family when you were younger under an oak tree, very similar to this one. But you also want to keep in mind that the oak tree itself is having experiences. And there are various ways of coming into contact with that experience, either through altered states, either meditative states, unitive experiences, and so forth. So that gives you kind of a broad sense of these four ecologies. Within each ecology, there is at least three levels of complexity. So within experience ecology, and all three levels of complexity basically run from gross to subtle to causal. For instance, in experience, there's somatic realities. That's the first level of complexity. In the second level of complexity, there are psychological realities, psychodynamic realities, maybe cognitive dimensions. And then the third level of complexity is spiritual experiences. Now, a human, it seems, and my experience is, has access to all three levels of complexity. Different animals within and plants within the natural world probably don't have access to all three levels of complexity. But nevertheless, as I was saying, they do have some of it. And so we need to be open to exploring and understanding in what ways might those levels of complexity manifest within different beings. Moving over to the 3 levels of complexity within culture, you have kind of intersubjective or intercorporeal dynamics, kind of somatic shared realities. First level. Second level are worldviews that are shared among people or beings. And then the third level are more kind of like spiritual perspectives or religious understandings. The 3 levels of complexity within behavior include kind of just physical, instinctual types of behaviors, kind of gross realm, biologically driven types of behaviors. Then the next level is more intentional behaviors, so like spiritual activism, doing behaviors that have a particular kind of intent behind them. So it's not just driven by instincts, but there's actually kind of a correlation of mind or mental activity that's associated with the behavior. And then the third level of complexity within behavior ecology would be kind of spiritual behaviors or rituals or prayers or different things that you might do that have not only a mental intention behind it, but a spiritual intention behind it. But nevertheless, because it's focused on behaviors, you're looking at the exterior manifestations of that intention. And just to finish, the 3 levels of complexity in the systems ecology include natural systems as the first level of complexity, then social systems as the second level of complexity. This would include institutions, economic systems, political systems, education systems. And then the third level of complexity would be subtle realm dynamics, system dynamics. So this would be gardening with nature spirits, biodynamic farming, and a number of other kind of subtle energy-based systems that are grounded in the natural world. So, it's a lot of stuff going on in those various ecologies. And this is why Wilber's work is both very exciting and also extremely overwhelming. Because one of the things integral theory is saying with regards to the quadrants and these 3 levels of complexity I just highlighted within each one is that if you're really going to do an integral ecology, then you need to keep in mind all 12 of those domains of reality. Somatic realities, psychological realities, spiritual experiences, religious perspectives, worldviews, intercorporeal aspects, environmental health and design, organic living and activism, spiritual action, subtle realm dynamics, institutions, and natural systems. So it's a lot of stuff for any single person to be accountable for. And in fact, no one, and this is what's nice about integral theory, is that no one really is accountable for any one of those domains. What's required is kind of a team effort, so that people who are experts or specialists in those various domains would work together on different projects, for example, to try and bring those perspectives into relationship to the goals of whatever you happen to be doing. And then Wilber ups the ante and says, not only do you have to be aware of these various dimensions of reality, which in a sense represent kind of the stuff out there, but you also have to take into account the internal realities that exist within all beings, and in particular, human beings. And so now I want to focus on the levels, and these kind of represent the various value sets that exist within ourselves. We often hold many of these value sets, and we often tend to gravitate towards one of them as well. And you see different approaches to the environment tend to specialize in these different value systems. A lot can be said about the developmental and horizontal aspects of these value systems, but I think for the purposes of our time, I'll just leave that to the side unless questions come up regarding it, and just focus on the actual kind of content of each value system. For simplicity, I'm going to draw on spiral dynamics, which some of you might be familiar with, and others of you and most of you probably not. But spiral dynamics is one of many models that looks at the various kind of waves of consciousness that exist within ourselves and within our communities and within our cultures. And just to kind of run through them, and again, a lot has been written about this, so I'm just going to give a very distilled account of it, which leaves much to be desired in terms of explication. So there's purple, and the purple value system is very much concerned with kind of ritual and magic and kind of one with nature experiences. There's the red value system. Actually, so let me run through this chart, actually. This might make more sense for people. So there's purple, and then I associate with purple, in the best sense, a number of the New Age approaches to ecology. And I refer to them as eco-guardians, people who are wanting to guard the natural world. And there's often a sense of paradise has been lost, and we need to regain it, and we need to guard it. And so the motivation for recycling, to give an example, would be to recycle as a ritual or as a prayer. The next wave or value set is red. And red is typically more of kind of a egocentric or all about me or kind of a heroic perspective or energy. And I refer to this as the eco-warrior. And their approach to recycling, for example, could be fuck recycling. Like, I don't want to do it. You can't tell me what to do. Or maybe the perspective would be, don't tell me what to do. I mean, the system's already screwed up. We're going to hell. It's over. There's no need to recycle. Like, don't bother me with your bullshit. So it would kind of have this really kind of intense energy behind it often. The next wave is blue, which is more of a stewardship approach. And blue tends to prefer kind of law and order and structure. So I refer to them as the eco-managers. And their approach to recycling is that they recycle because it's the law, or for God, because God has entrusted the natural world for them, and so it's their responsibility to take good care of it and to manage it. The next one is orange, which is kind of more of the scientific rationalist perspective, kind of an entrepreneurial approach, and I refer to them as either the eco-capitalist or the eco-strategist. And this approach is concerned with kind of getting ahead or achieving something with kind of making a profit. And so their approach to recycling is that they'll recycle in order to make money. And that's kind of the only reason they'll recycle. Or because it'll preserve resources for us to use later on down the road. Kind of a strategy. So recycling is a strategy to secure resources for our consumption later. The next one is green, which is kind of the sensitive, consensual, anti-hierarchy, kind of pro-liberation approaches. And I refer to them as the radical ecologies, or the eco-radical. And because they're often very concerned with saving the environment, I've characterized their approach to recycling as recycle or die. Like, if we don't recycle, if we don't take measures to save the planet, we're in big trouble. And so sometimes there's this apocalyptic perspective associated with the eco-radical. The next one is yellow, which is kind of a holistic or kind of systems-based approach, or a very complex approach. An approach that's trying to keep in mind many different things. So trying to keep in mind like social systems and ecosystems and psychological dynamics and so forth. And because they're often systems based in terms of chaos and complexity, their one way I characterize their approach to recycling is that they recycle in order to circulate energy. That everything is just various pockets of energy, and recycling is important because it helps move energies and just recycle energies. Turquoise is the next one, and I refer to it as holonic, and this is where I locate my particular approach, and which I associate with Wilbur's work, and call it the integral ecologist. And here you recycle not only for the earth and to save the earth, not only for humanity, but also for your nation state because it's the law, also for your community because maybe that's a value that your community has, and also for yourself because it feels good and so forth. So here you're recycling for kind of like 5 or 6 or 7 different reasons, opposed to like any one particular reason. You're seeing the need to recycle because it is multivalent, that it holds all these different reasons within it. And then the last one is choral or kind of mystical approaches. I refer to this as the eco-sage, and they recycle because it's a beautiful act, just because it naturally occurs. It's not like they're thinking about it, because there's not a subject and object distinction necessarily, but just because it's kind of what's appropriate in the moment, so to speak. So to just give a few examples of approaches to the environment that are associated with each of these value sets, I'm just going to kind of list off some things, and then I'm going to be done, and then we can chat and explore some of this. So the New Age, in the New Age approach, or purple, you have Earth Goddess groups, nature worship, kind of eco-rituals, Wicca, cultural appropriation of indigenous practices, different versions of shamanism, or kind of romantic ecologies. In red, or the heroic approaches, you have Earth First, monkey wrenching, which is like sabotaging equipment, like going into like a logging camp and destroying all the tractors, which can be referred to as ecotage, kind of like sabotage. The stoic mountain climber, extreme sports, rock climbing, trophy hunting, frontier mentalities, and off-the-grid housing, meaning people who want to build a house that they have their own, they don't need to use utilities or electricity or water systems, that they kind of create a self-sustained little system so that, in a sense, the government can't track them. Blue, or the stewardship approaches, you have Earth as the Garden of Eden. You have the Puritan, kind of early American ethos, Boy and Girl Scouts, the EPA, and its kind of environmental regulations, and then also environmental legislation, or the fish and game departments that are kind of regulating hunting rules, national and state parks, game reserves, the Endangered Species Act, Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and so forth. And the orange, or entrepreneurial approaches to the environment, there's natural capitalism, conservationism, which is a perspective that we need to preserve it in order to use it later. So it has what's referred to as an anthropocentric perspective, that we're saving the environment not because the environment is worthy in and of itself, but because it's worthy to save it for us to use later. And you also have kind of the science of ecology here, or utilitarian ethics, political ecology, urban planning, what's called deontological ethics, or ethics by duty. So you act in a way because it's dutiful or it makes rational sense. In the green, or radical approaches, you have deep ecology, ecofeminism, social ecology, animal rights approaches, Paul Taylor's biocentrism, Holmes Rolston's ecocentrism. Now, the difference between biocentrism is that you're valuing life, wherever life occurs, whereas ecocentrism isn't concerned with life as much as it's concerned with the system. So it's valuing the system over the life of any individual member of that system. So an example of that would be like allowing hunting to occur because it helps regulate the deer herd, which is important to do, opposed to the Endangered Species Act, which is saying you can't kill any California condors because each one of them is so valuable in and of itself, we can't afford to lose any of them. Also within the green and radical approaches, you have environmental justice, kind of Green Party politics, an understanding of kind of the historical concepts of ecology and the natural world that have occurred at different points in our collective history, bioregionalism. Then in the yellow or complex approaches, you have the new cosmology associated with Thomas Berry and Brian Swim, Teilhard de Desjardins' noosphere, the Gaia hypothesis, Gregory Bateson's ecology of mind, the chaos sciences and complexity and system sciences, Charlene Spretnik's ecological postmodernism, Aldo Leopold's land ethic, and then sustainable approaches to development, which are trying to include eco and social systems and cultural dynamics. So turquoise or holonic approaches include integral ecology as I'm trying to develop it. Edgar Morin, who's a French thinker and philosopher, he has what's called an approach that he refers to as complex thought, which is very similar to Wilber's approach in many ways. You also have Leonardo Bof's liberation theology down in Brazil, which makes a lot of efforts to include kind of all the different pieces that I've talked about in its own way. And then you have lastly the choral or mystical approaches to the environment, which include Ralph Waldo Emerson's transcendentalism, Black Elk, various shamans, St. Francis of Assisi's love of animals, Ken Wilber's eco-noetic self, or Arnie Ness's ecological self. This is where the sense of identity expands to include aspects or the totality of the natural world. Neo-pagans, vision quests, psychedelic experiences, spiritual activism, and various religious approaches to the environment. Excuse me. So I know I've just dumped a lot of information on you and mentioned a lot of things that ideally I would be able to explain at length, or at least explain with more detail. But what I really kind of wanted to do in this talk by kind of shotgunning through a lot of that stuff is really attempting to give a sense of Wilber's vision and what, in this case, an integral ecological approach to the environment would include. It would include a deep desire to try and honor all of that, all of those pieces, and work with other people and in any given situation to know when to draw on what pieces and how to interface the different pieces with each other. And so to settle for example, with regards to the 8 ecological selves that I've just gone through, to focus on any one of those or just a few of those, in a sense, is a violation against the cosmos. It's a violation against the complexity of our situation. And if we're really going to try and honor with fullness and breadth and depth the complexity of each and every moment and how each and every moment can be understood, then we need to work together with experts and specialists and with people with hearts of passion to try and bring together as many of these pieces into relationship as possible. And for me, this is one way that I really get a sense of Wilber's Buddhist inclinations. Because when I look at this, when I hear this, when I explore this, for me it's a way of going, wow, this is the Bodhisattva vow. This is a way of really committing to trying to save all sentient beings and trying to honor the complexity of our given situation. And I think on that note, I'll end and open it up to questions or clarifications or comments. So. Clint.
Well, I want to. This goes back to the oak tree analogy, and for example, and honoring the interiority of the oak tree itself, and how that kind of borrows from tribal religions and Native American religions, for example.
Yeah.
Too, and in a way that I don't think that kind of interiority is honored in the main Western religions right now.
Right.
It's just, maybe you can comment, because there seems to be like kind of like an ongoing view that say Christianity, as an example, is a more evolved religion, that it deals more with kind of like more spiritual or higher concerns than say the tribal religions. But in a way, it seems kind of like it's just the opposite the way you presented that.
Right.
And maybe you can kind of talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. Christianity, in a sense, as with any religion or so many of our approaches to the world, has expressions of itself that occur at each and every one of those various value sets that I went through. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And another aspect is that I think it's very easy to find within the Christian tradition examples of saints and sages such as St. Francis of Assisi, or some of the more current versions are Matthew Fox's creation spirituality, or even the liberation theology that's associated with South America. In a sense, those various movements and approaches are trying to kind of cultivate out of Christianity that part of it that has occurred at different points in its history. So you're right to highlight that Christianity is not just dripping with descriptions of the interiors of oaks or other beings, but there are various people within the tradition that have talked about those kinds of experience and who are kind of part of the canon of the church. And so people like Matthew Fox and liberation theology are kind of trying to revision Christianity, in part guided by a respect for the indigenous perspective and trying to create a deeper vision of Christianity that is more balanced in that regard. So yeah, I think it's complex, and it's kind of the work of the next 200 years, is my sense. But there are people who seem to be making progress with it. Yeah, here.
I wonder if you could give an example of that model in action, if there's any particular regional issue or environmental issue, and how it would be in action with the model. Just curious how that would work.
Yeah. In Bhutan, I kind of explored 3 case studies that are where I try and do that. And it's hard and it's complex, but let me pick maybe a more simple example. In the case of maybe like a stream restoration project, where there's a small school, kind of junior high school, and there's a stream that runs through kind of the back part of the school that's on its property. Say the biologist teacher at 5th grade or 8th grade or whatever decides that they want to create kind of a school project that restores the stream and kind of creates an educational opportunity and so on. So let's say they either bring in an integral ecologist, or they themselves are familiar with this approach and are wanting to work with it. Then, to me, they would work together with a team of people to explore in this situation, the stream restoration project, what are the aspects of the project? What are the subjective dimensions that we want to keep in mind? What are the intersubjective dimensions, cultural or behavior systems dimensions? And so maybe they would just brainstorm and get as much kind of information on the board as possible, just to maybe give a couple questions from each one of those perspectives in relation to the stream restoration project, because I've been kind of massaging and developing this example because I think that question's so important. So subjective dimensions to consider would be, what forms of consciousness exist in or around Anderson Creek, and how do they affect one another, and how will they be affected by the proposal? How might the design of walkways and the placement of signs, benches, etc. support a visitor's interior experience? What are the features of the landscape that have aesthetic pull and are most likely to inspire painting, poems, and contemplation? And how might we facilitate those encounters? So I don't want to run through all of them because it would take too much time, but maybe to try and give a brief responses, I would imagine an individual asking those kinds of questions, or questions that are appropriate to each domain, and then trying to work together and brainstorm with the community of individuals who are engaged in the project as to which answers to those questions do they find most important. Because maybe one community would decide, well, we don't really care about people's interior experiences as much as we care about the aesthetic aspect. And so it's kind of a situational approach. But the goal of the integral ecologist is to just try and get all of these pieces on the table for consideration. And then depending on each individual project, you would weave together kind of a unique combination of those dimensions. But yeah, that's the work that I have to do, is start really exploring good examples that put this in action. Yeah.
In terms of the practice aspect of integral ecology,
Yeah.
From what I hear, you know, the way you describe Kim Wilber's vision, it seems very good, very thorough, and you know, has great explicative power.
Yeah.
You know, in the Buddhist canon, many theories and things are postulated, but part of the process, you know, like the 12-fold chain of causation,
Yeah.
the causes of suffering and so forth, you know, these were gone into in great detail. But then, at a certain point, in terms of practice, there comes in this prajnaparamita,
Yeah.
finding the emptiness within the system.
Right.
I'm just curious whether he is enough of a Buddhist to approach his own system.
Yeah. In fact, I think he really is. Throughout his writings, he often makes comments about that to remind people of the limits of models, to remind people of kind of the pitfalls of using theories. And he often will conclude books or chapters or sections with pointing out instructions as to the emptiness of each and everything, or the ever-present, always, already. So kind of throughout his writings and throughout his understanding, that is emphasized. I experienced a lot of people who read his material don't seem to realize that, or they lose sight of that piece, or they respond more to the model and don't remember or recall that he's often also pointing out in each and every book, and often in many chapters, the always already. And one of the things he also does is says that this model doesn't exist out there. It's not reality. It's only the way the world looks like from a particular perspective within an individual. So here, this is his way of kind of contextualizing and saying that the four quadrants and the levels, in a sense, don't exist out there. They only exist within a particular viewpoint. But that viewpoint can be very helpful in various ways. And so he's really good about avoiding what is called the representational paradigm, and saying that we're just mapping reality, and if we get a better map, then we're better off. He's saying, well, no, that's a misnomer. We're not trying to get a better map of reality. We're trying to get a more complex perspective that we always keep in mind is just a perspective that we're holding. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that piece in because it's important.
We just have one more question.
One more. Oh, my gosh.
Let's see. I experienced the listing as somewhat overwhelming.
Yeah.
Not unfamiliar, of course, with Buddhist, not dissimilar, of course, to some Buddhist lists. And sort of trying to think about this, and it comes back to the example. So I was asked for an example also. One of the things that arises for me is from Myers-Briggs stuff about P's and J's, which you're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
And I'm a P, typical college professor, teaching a group of students who are managers who run Myers-Briggs on. They are all J's. J's are people who say, you've got to do something, you have to make a decision, as opposed to we need to sit around and contemplate it. And so it seems to me that what you're presenting is, in some sense, or talking about what we're presenting here is all about the interior side, the various perspectives that we have, the lists and so forth. So what do we say in a situation, let's say, where people are logging the woods? What do we say to the J who says, all right, what should we do?
In 60 seconds.
Yes, well, that's very J.
So what should we do about logging the forest? Like whether do we or don't we log the forest?
I don't know. I mean, leave it. It's your model.
I mean, there's so many variables. I'd have to be in dialogue with you to get a clear sense of kind of the different aspects. Like, is this a temperate rainforest up in Canada? Is it, a pine forest, in the Sierra Nevadas? Like, what are the laws? Why are we logging? Like, there's so many different variables. And to me, that's the value of Wilber's work is he's really asking us that we have to try and weave in a bunch of different aspects of that situation and that there's no simple answer. And one answer in one situation is not...
So what we say then is that the J line is the wrong line?
No. I mean, maybe... But you just... Why would you say it's a wrong line?
Because, let's say I'm a J.
Yeah.
We need to do something, and you're telling me we need to sit around and talk about it and gather data and so forth.
Well, that's doing something. Talking, gathering data.
Yeah, well, I guess my thought would be...
There's
like,
trees being cut down while we're doing this.
Well, right, but like if they're in that big of a hurry to cut the tree down, then I would say, go ahead and cut the tree down. But if you're interested in exploring some of the details, because if they have to cut it down by noon and they're not willing to explore over a week period of negotiation and discussions, then you can't stop them. I mean, necessarily, depending on, if they have a logging contract or if they have, a quota or, it's like, so, I don't know, it's an important question, but I feel like it needs to be fleshed out and more nuances of the question have to be brought into...
Well, as an ecotogs member, I would say, sure, we can stop them.
Sean, I wonder if you'd be willing to discuss with people after we do a formal close.
Yeah.
Some people may want to leave.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there will be coffee and tea and refreshments, well, tea and refreshments, for about half an hour. Announcements? George?
A reminder that talks are available at the GBF website, gaybuddhist.org.
I'm the host for today, and I just to remind you that there's the Dana Bowl, and we suggest a $5 donation, and more definitely if you can afford, less if it's partial. And please clean your cups.
And also help put away the questions at the end. Are there any people here for the first time? They all say.
I also want to announce that 2 weeks from today we're having our second annual, all fellowship meeting, in which we'll discuss how the Gay Buddhist Fellowship works, maybe take a second to honor the people who are working to keep it together, there's some things that we could do that people would like to see done and maybe have some energy to do. For example, some social events. Anyway, we're going to do that in 2 weeks, and I really would, as one of the steering committee members, I really love to see as many people participate as would like.
And just to follow up on that, it would really be great to see a lot of people there, and we'll try and make it a very meaningful and engaging event, not just rubber stamping of the, or whatever you might think it might be. We'd like it to be a real good, deep, and penetrating discussion.
Any more?
I was surfing the web and I saw that Jonathan Kabat-Zinn is going to be doing a workshop in the Bay Area through Spirit Rock. And he's also doing a Friday night talk before the Saturday and Sunday workshops at the Unitarian Church. I'm sorry I don't remember the topic of his talk, but I know it sounded interesting to me. You can get more information on the Spirit Rock website.
Returning to our senses.
Returning to something.
Okay, should we, I know it's quite often we stand in the lands for the closing, and John, you.
I'd like to dedicate any and all merit that was generated today through our engagement with this material and the various aspects of environmental thinking. I'd like to dedicate that to our planetary ecological situation, and hope that it's able to help us deepen our openness and understanding of the various aspects that are interconnected with the environment. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.